So I gave that long introduction before to highlight these images that John is seeing. This is all one big vision, one big revelation, but Jesus is giving him three distinct images of where the church is going to be going. What's the end game? Now, I'll explain this a little bit more, but you have to know who John's writing to. The readers of John's letter, right at this moment, are undergoing extreme persecution, the likes of which I doubt anybody in this room, thank God, will have to deal with, ever. They're being impaled, killed, burned, murdered for what they believe. And John is writing them with these visions, with this picture, these images, and today it's the new heaven and the new earth and the new city, as a way not, and let me say this, not to provide numbers and symbols and imagery that you can use to decode when the end of times is coming. That's not John's intention at all. I'm sorry. If you came asking when is the end of times, that's not what we're going to do tonight, because that's not what he's writing about. He's casting them a vision about where they're going, and why? To give them hope. To give them hope in the face of hopelessness. You'll see this when he talks about the tears being wiped away. He wants to give these people hope, not a mere abstract idea or an academic exercise. And he gives this image of the heaven and earth, new heavens and new earth. But in his image, we don't just magically get whisked away. No. If you notice, the heaven comes down as a city, a big city with buildings that are touchable and tangible, and they shine and they glimmer like nothing you and I have ever seen before. And it's incredibly important that you and I understand why this city is so important for us as Christians. And it's good because you guys all live in Seoul, so you're already ahead of the game. You're like in a big city right now. You're like, wait, Revelation 21 is already happening. Good. You are in a city, and it's important that you know why there's a city and why it's coming down from heaven and what it has to say about the church. He says this thing, the new heaven and new earth is coming. What does it mean? Remember, John's trying to give these people hope in the face of hopelessness. He's trying to tell them that you will overcome somehow, and then he gives them an image of a city coming down from heaven. That's just really, really strange. He doesn't give them a pep talk. He doesn't give them religion. He doesn't give them rules. He doesn't wag his finger, and he doesn't say pray more, and he doesn't say go to church more. No, he says the city's coming. And it makes every difference for the way you live your life today. And if you don't believe me, wait. I'll convince you, hopefully, maybe. Let me explain what I mean here first. The new heaven and the new earth, this concept. I know it sounds all weird, and we're not familiar with this passage, so let me try to break it down this way. First, I want to explain what the new heaven and the new earth is. You have a right to know that today. What is it? And why is it so important? And secondly, then, why do you need it? Of course, you come to church. Why do you need this new city coming down? Why do you need the new heaven? Why do I need it? Why do we as a church need it? And then how do you get it? What is it? Why do you need it? How do you get it? First, what is it? Look at verse 5. He says, behold, I'm making everything new. The new city is not, like I said, you and me being raptured up in ethereal fog. I'm sorry, we're not clouds, angels playing harps on clouds. That's not the way it's going to work. The city comes down and it's real and it's tangible. And he says, I'm making everything new. Everything is restored. This is God breaking into us, not making us escape. And this is incredibly profound. And it has vast implications for your life. Let me explain and unpack what I mean by this. When I said the city's breaking in, heaven is coming down to us, to here. And he's going to restore things. And he's going to wipe away tears. And he's going to take away pain. And he's going to take away sorrow. You notice he doesn't say, I'm going to make you forget your pain and your sorrow and your tears. He says, I'll wipe them away. I'll make everything new. It's that line that I love, the part in where Samwise first wakes up after, remember the rings destroyed in Lord of the Rings? And he looks around and he's devastated and he sees Gandalf. And he says, I thought you were dead, Gandalf. And he says, well, I even thought I was dead. And he pauses and he says, in one of the most eschatologically, I can't even say the words my theological training gave me, the most end times profound statement ever, Samwise says, is it true that is everything sad becoming untrue? Is everything sad becoming untrue? As a way to say this, the sad stuff doesn't just get wiped away. It gets restored. Relationships healed. Cities mended and built. He doesn't just take us up to the fog. He comes with a city. And if you read the description, which we skipped, It's a beautiful description of a city. Buildings that shimmer and glow. It's a healed world. Is everything sad becoming untrue? There's something very, very wrong with the world. It's a place filled with sadness, which I know most of you know. It's a place cursed by sin, and it's groaning. But listen, in the final times, those sad things are made untrue. The curse is rolled back. And it's material. It's tangible. You can touch it. Do you see what the implications are? How cool this is? It means that when that new city comes down, you and I are going to eat together. I can't wait to trade recipes with Jesus. I like cooking. I bet he knows a lot more than I do. I get to eat with him. I get to hug. I get to kiss. I get to feel. It's touchable. It's real. It's tangible. You walk. You hug. And if you don't believe me, here's what I said I was going to convince you. Look at Luke 24. What does Jesus do when he's resurrected? Does he float? Does he say, don't touch me, I'm fog? It's so fun, floating, floating, floating. No, he eats a fish. He eats a fish and honey. Why? He says, I'm not a ghost. I'm real. Touch me. I'll eat with you. This is unlike almost any other worldview you're going to find. We don't escape this world. We're part of it to rebuild it. We're part of the process right now because the new city's coming. And when it comes, everything will be restored. There's a pastor, you can hold this theologically if you believe this or not, but I think it's a funny story regardless. I had a pastor, this old Scottish guy when I was in high school. Loved this guy, great preacher. Has a church in Ohio. And, he's a very conservative theological dude, but somebody pressed him one time and said his wife's name was Linda. And his name was, I think it was Linda. His name is Alistair. And they said, well, you've been married to Linda for 30-some years, but what does it matter? Marriage is, it's a mirage. When you get to heaven, you won't even know her. You won't be married to her. And then somebody pushed him a little bit after service, and they said, well, what do you think, Alistair? Do you think you'll be married to Linda when you get to heaven? Now there's a lot of theological ways you can parse that down. And I'm not going to break it all down to you, but he had an interesting way to put it. He says, I hope I am. I believe I will be. But that marriage will be the fulfillment of this shadow of a marriage that I have. I'll be unselfish to her. I don't need her. I'll love her. I don't crave her and hold on to her. I'll cherish her. He says it'll be the fulfillment of the marriage that is just a shadow of it right now. He says I'll be able to touch her, hug her, I hope. And he says, he ends by saying this, I hope that she'll let me go take her by the lake where we had our first kiss. And we can kiss again. Isn't that a nice story? That's a way to say this. The new city's coming. It's real. It affects you. You can touch it. You can eat it. You can hug. And this is why he says in verse 3, he says there will be spiritual healing. He says, I'll be with them and they'll be with me. That's spiritual healing between God and you. Look at verse 4. Every tear is also wiped away. It's the ultimate Kleenex. Everything physically is restored. Your bodies, your brokenness. Everything matters. Now, I said this has good and big implications for you and me, mainly for you, because you got to go to work tomorrow. Do you know that when you go to work tomorrow, or school, or wherever you find yourself, it matters. What you're doing now is building. The new city's going to come and restore it and make it better than anything you can make it. But every time you write a poem, it's a shadow of the poem you're going to write one day. Every time you write a book, it's just a shadow of what you're going to write one day, but you are going to write. You are going to eat and dance and sit down at the table. You can touch it. It's real, and it means that whatever your job is, it's not insignificant. Whatever you're doing starting tomorrow is not insignificant. You're building. It's not going to get it wiped away. It's going to be, everything sad will be made untrue. Are you an architect? And you build buildings? Look at what you'll build in the new city. It says it glimmers like transparent glass, gold like glass. I have no idea how that works, chemically speaking, but it's a beautiful picture, isn't it? The things that you build today, the emails you write, have eternal implications because the new city's coming, not us going away. Every tear is wiped away. The new heaven, the new earth. So, that's what it is. That's the nature. What John is essentially saying to these people who are going under severe persecution is he's trying to say this: you will overcome. And when you do, all the sad will be rolled back. And it'll be all the sweeter because it was all the sadder to begin with. The brokenness that you feel, the pain, it'll be rolled back. Bright, glimmering buildings, a river that you can drink from. Taste it. Touch it. Now, why do you need this? I just told you what it is. Doesn't that sound great? Hopefully I did a good sales job. This big old city is going to come down from heaven. And it's going to be better than any city, no matter what city you love. It's going to be better than that, infinitely so. Better subway transits, probably, I don't know. No traffic, no congestion, no pushy people in the subways, I don't know. But it'll be great. And right now, this world is a shadow of that. And it'll get restored. Everything's sad, untrue. Why do you need this? Well, let's look at why they needed it. Like I said, the people that John is writing to are undergoing severe, harsh, nasty persecution, the likes of which we do not have any context for the most part. If you were here many months ago, I explained these people, for being Christians, are being lit on fire and put on poles and lined up and down the street going in and out of Rome so that people had night lights to walk by. Human torches. They were having liquid metal poured into their head unless they would recant. They were beaten, persecuted, thrown to animals. Dismembered. I know, it's gross, it's horrible. And I thank God if none of us ever have to experience this, but what John's trying to write to them, and he's trying to give them hope. Hold on. If you're going through a lot of pain right now, and I come to you and I say, your pain will be okay because a city's coming out of heaven, you ought to look at me and say, that is stupid. It does nothing for me now. What do I care that a city's going to come down from heaven? What does it mean? Here, let me put it another way. John doesn't give them a pep talk. He doesn't say, buck up, guys. He doesn't say, pray harder. He doesn't say, just go to church more. He doesn't say, follow rules, religion. Be a better person. And all your suffering will go away. No, he says, one day something will come from outside of you and to restore you. And you need to see the end game. You need to see your life in the eternal perspective, or you will suffer now in eternity. If you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, how do you know there is an end of the tunnel? This is the city come down. This is the light shining to say, I'm here. I may feel like a long way off, and you're going through a lot of pain and tragedy and loss and suffering and persecution, but there's a light, there's a city, and it's coming, and it's going to break in. And I'll push this even further. Because the people John wrote to at this time, and historically speaking, we know that this message of hope was incredibly uplifting to them. Not a pep talk. Not just get better, go to church more, talk to your pastor more. No. He says, look at the city. Look ahead. And it'll make your suffering tolerable now. And we know this because we have many, many, many famous stories of martyrs being burned to death. And what are they doing? Singing hymns. We have many stories of martyrs having metal poured into their ear. What are they doing? Reciting psalms. I don't know about you, but if I'm being burned alive, I ain't singing no hymn. Let's be honest, people, right? It's church. We can be honest with each other. These people were. Why? They saw the city. They had the hope. That's what they needed. They didn't need a pep talk. They didn't need a lesson in morality. They don't need an ethics class or college. They need to see the city. You and I need to see that city coming for us. What would you sing when you're burned? As a way to say to this, let me put how to put it correctly. The way that you see the future working out should and will incredibly change the way you live today. Let me say that again. The way you believe the future of everything will work out in your life will incredibly change the way you live today. Let me give a couple examples. 2 stupid, silly, 1 serious. Get ready for the serious one, okay? It's kind of serious. First, silly. You remember the story of the mice, who 2 mice get dropped in the thing of cream? And one just drowns, doesn't do anything, doesn't try to swim or anything like that, and the other one starts churning so quickly that he turns it actually into butter and he's able to get out. Why? Because he saw the top of the can. There's that great line in Catch Me If You Can. Tom Hanks' character says, 2 little mice fell in a bucket of cream. The first mouse quickly gave up and drowned. The second mouse wouldn't quit. He struggled so hard that eventually he churned that cream into butter and crawled out. He turns to his friends and says, gentlemen, as of this moment, I am that second mouse. Are you the second mouse? Do you churn or do you drown? You don't churn if you don't have hope. If you don't have hope, you drown. If you don't see the city, you drown. Let me give another silly example of the way you see the future working out, the eternal city coming to you, everything restored, all the tears wiped away, all the sadness wiped away. If you see that, it changes the way, and it should change the way you and I live today. Let me give another silly example. 2 guys in a factory. They're making widgets. You know what widgets are, right? Everybody knows what widgets are. Widgets. Do I have to explain it? No. Widgets. They're making widgets. They're stamping widgets on a factory line. 2 guys. Boom, 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 boom. Widget after widget after widget after widget. And I know many of you feel like that's your job. Just making widget after widget after widget after widget. Now, 2 men standing right next to each other making the same thing. You go to one and you say, at the end of this year, I will give you $5 million. You go to the other one and you say, at the end of this year, I will give you $5. One, guess which one? Starts hymning and singing while he works. Widget, 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 widget. The other one groans and bemoans it. Widget, widget. Why? Because of the hope of what's coming. Not because of the present circumstances and the reality in which they're dealing with now. Let me push this further, and I'm going to get serious here. That was a stupid widget story and a stupid butter story about mice, and I doubt you'll remember them ever after this. Or hopefully not, I don't know. The way in which you and I, if we as Christians see the city coming, and we know that everything here will be restored and renewed and rebuilt, the way it was meant to be in the first place, the way it was back in the garden, which we'll get to next week, should entirely change your worldview and perspective on suffering. I've been asked a lot of times, and I've said this over the years, people ask me as a pastor now, they didn't care before, but they ask me now as a pastor, why suffering? Why would a God allow suffering to happen? Why would he allow pain and hate and murder and killing and death? Why? Great question. And I reflected on that in this message as I was preparing this. Because again, the way that you look at the future will entirely change the way you look at your present day circumstances. Are you going to be widget, 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 widget? Or widget, widget, miserable, drowning in the butter? Let me tell you a little bit of my story. And so I'm going to try getting through this if I can. I promised myself I wouldn't cry. I won't cry. This past week was, in light of today being September 11th, this past week I gave a talk, a lecture at a forum, which I've done every year that we've lived here in Korea. And it's to commemorate 9/11, to remember it. It's at the center over here where Koreans are invited to come and to ask me questions about my experience, because I was there at Ground Zero that morning. And I was firsthand witnessing to all of this stuff. I saw both planes go, or I felt the first plane go in right behind my window. My building was connected to the World Trade Center. I was up high enough that I felt the first plane go in, and I was up high enough that as I looked out the window, I saw the second plane go in. And many of my office coworkers were there with me that morning. I don't have time to give you the whole spiel. You can ask me about it later. But I'll tell you this, I'll sum it up as the horrific, disgusting death that I saw fly out of those windows, close enough that I could tell what clothes they were wearing. And I still remember it to this day. It was chaos. It was confusion. And I know many of you saw it on your TVs, or many of you saw it from another place, or you heard about it another way, and it was horrific, and it was painful. And there we were right in front of it. A front row seat to this disgustingness, and one of the most horrific things that I hope I ever have to see in my life. They evacuated us slowly and kept us down at the foot of the building that I was working at, which was only about, 50, 60 yards from the Trade Center site itself. So we continued to see the stuff come out of the window, and I won't gross you out too much because you know the footage better than I do, because I was there and I didn't see it on TV. The towers came down. We were covered. Couldn't contact my family. Lost, alone, confused. Now, many weeks later, we were transplanted, my company. This was before I became a pastor, obviously. We were transplanted down towards the site because we had to resume work. It was down about 2-3 blocks away, another street away on Wall Street. And I swear, after 4 weeks even or so that we were transplanted there, you could still smell the burning flesh coming over from that site every time we went out for lunch. It was horrible. It was painful. And I can only imagine how horrible and painful it was for the people who lost their family members' lives in those buildings. Sometime later, I had a friend, and I shared this story on Friday night at this lecture. I had a friend who was not a believer, and he really didn't like the church, and he didn't much like Christianity, but he was willing to ask me a question, and he asked me what is one of the greatest questions that you can ever ask: why, Aric, why? And he pointed over there because we could still see it, everything smoldering, and he said, why would that happen? What did they do to deserve it? Why that suffering? And I said, John, I have no earthly idea. I don't know why. I only know that. I only know that one day those buildings, in my hope of hopes, will be rebuilt better and more beautiful than they ever were. And those lives will be restored better and more beautiful than they ever were. Why? Because this is the only God who says, my son knows suffering. I know it firsthand. I have an answer for it. It's the new city coming, rebuilt, restoration, every tear wiped away. And I looked at them and I said, those families, I would feign to go to those families and give them some religious excuse as to why that suffering had to happen. But it did. And those tears will be wiped away. If I don't have that hope, that is a meaningless, smoldering patch of hot, disgusting, horrific madness. But if I have a hope that this city's coming, every tear wiped away, pain no more, death no more, it changes to me then. I can churn the butter. I can sing making widgets because I have hope. This is the only God who says, I know suffering because I suffered on the cross. Now, in the time that I have remaining, how do you get this? I don't want to transition too quickly because I realize the significance of that story for a lot of people and the emotional weight that it carries. And I value that, trust me. I value it. I've lived with it for 15 years now. I don't want to move on too quickly from that, but I gotta. Why? I've got to get to the gospel here. There's good news. There's Jesus. Do you notice he says here in verse 6, to all who are thirsty, I will give without payment. And to know really what he's talking about, you have to go back to the other book of John. When John wrote the book of Revelation, you have to go back to John chapter 4. Remember, Jesus sits at the well and he looks at the woman and he says, you want water? I got water that if you drink it, every longing, every thirst will be quenched. Every desire that you've had deep down in your heart, you go after 5 husbands, whatever. I'm the one you need to drink of. And in the end of Revelation, he says, here I am again. I'm the water. And if you're thirsty, take me. And this is why, again, on the cross in John 19:28, Jesus doesn't coincidentally say, what? I thirst. It wasn't just physical thirst. It was spiritual thirst. And you know what he got for his thirst? You get a river of life. Could you imagine how good that tastes in that city that's coming? How clean and how precious and cold and refreshing that is? He got nasty sour wine that you wouldn't give to almost a dead horse in a mocking way. When he says, I thirst, he gets the bitterness. When you say, I thirst, and we all do, you get the river in the middle of the city. This is why after Jesus says, I thirst, that's why he cries out, it's finished. Not coincidentally, in Revelation 21, chapter 6, what did we read? He says, it's done. What commentators are pointing out is this. What happens on the cross is directly undid when the city comes down again. He says, I thirst. Now you are thirsty. Get this. It's finished. I die. Now it's done. Restoration. Tears wiped away. Let me press a little further. I have a couple minutes to tell you another story. There's a guy he wrote this story down, and I might butcher it a little bit, but I apologize if I do. A story of a man a man and a wife had a daughter, little girl. I think she was around 6 or so. They lost the mother to a car accident. The mother was in a car accident and died. And the man sometime later was walking with his little daughter. And of course, they were going through the grief and the sadness of it. I think it was about a year or so later. And they were standing on the street corner, and a bus went by really fast, as buses are prone to do, and very chaotically. And the girl got scared. She jumped back. And he looks at her and he said, "Did the bus hit you?" She says, "No, just the shadow of the bus." And he said, "Know that death didn't hit your mom. Just the shadow of death hit her. Because the real death hit him. The shadow of death hits you and me. But look at the city that we get to live in and eat and play and laugh. It is done. Because it was finished on the cross with him. If you're thirsty for something in your life, he says, come. No payment, grace alone. You didn't earn it, you get it. Drink it, taste it. Have this as your eternal perspective, and I guarantee you, starting tomorrow, you will have a different view on your modern perspective. How you live today will be forever changed by what you see coming in the clouds to you. Death. Death hit Jesus. It won't hit you if you take him and know that one day he's going to come back and he's going to wipe every little tear away from you. He's going to hug you like you've never been hugged. This is a great poem, George Herbert's Dialogue Anthem. And I put it in your bulletin, I think. Hopefully I put it in your outlining. This is a dialogue between a Christian and death itself. And the Christian says, "Alas, poor death, where is thy glory? Where is thy famous force, thy ancient sting?" And death responds, "Alas, poor mortal, void of story, go spell and read how I've killed thy king." The Christian looks back and says, "Poor death, and who was hurt thereby? Thy curse being laid on him makes thee accursed." Death finishes saying, "Let losers talk, yet thou shalt die. These arms shall crush thee." The Christian stands and says, "Spare not, do thy worst. I shall only be one day better than before. Thou so much worse that thou shalt be no more. Death, where is thy sting?" Sometime later, George Herbert finished this by saying, "Death used to be an executioner, but the gospel has made him just a gardener. Everything he thinks he kills, he grows. Because Jesus rose. Alas, death, where's thy sting? Let losers talk." And Christian says, "Bring it. Crush me. I'll only grow better." What's the result as I close here? Look at the end of the passage, and it says this: "I saw no temple in the city, for the temple is the Lord God, the Almighty, and the Lamb, and the city had no need of sun or moon to shine on it." You know what that's saying? It's finished. Every light you chase, everything you and I crave in life, we don't need it anymore. We'll have it the way it was always meant to be had in the first place. That house where you may have experienced abuse or neglect, it'll be rebuilt, and it'll be all the more beautiful for it. And the family that may have wronged you or hurt you will be restored, and you won't cry anymore. And any place in life that you found brokenness and pain, because Jesus took it on the cross, it'll get rebuilt the way it was meant to be. That's the new heaven. That's the new earth. Take it. He died for it. Go in prayer now.